Hi friends, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Here's what we're discussing today. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the testimony that came in on day 9, particularly as it relates to experts. And the first person we're going to start with here is not technically an expert. In other words, he hasn't been hired by one side or the other to come in and offer his opinions. Instead, he is what we would call a fact witness with expertise. His name is Nicolay Montoya. He is a safety investigator with New Mexico's version of OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health. And what's really interesting about his testimony here is that he basically comes in and tells what the investigation was and how it was conducted. I've omitted that, and I went straight to the cross-examination by the guy who additionally did the opening statement for the prosecution. And as you may recall, I wasn't exactly overwhelmed with his expertise when he did his opening statement. Here he does a pretty good job of getting to what this particular investigator didn't look at. Let's take a listen.
Thank you. So even if as part of your investigation you found concerning conduct by an individual employee, you couldn't issue that person a fine, correct?
Not individually, no.
Great. And this is not a criminal investigation that you're conducting, correct?
Correct.
All right. And so you mentioned you did not review the Santa Fe Sheriff's Office report. Did you conduct a forensic download of any of the individuals' phones involved in this incident?
No.
Did you review the over 100 behind-the-scenes videos that were produced by production outfitters?
No, those were not available to us.
All right. Did you review any footage from the filming of the Rust movie?
Only a small clip that was put into public media.
Was that the clip, just kind of a few-second clip of Mr. Baldwin manipulating the firearm out of his bandolier?
Correct.
So all of the other videos that were filmed as part of the movie, you did not look at any of those, correct?
Correct.
All right. Did you hire any sort of firearms expert to review the revolver or ammunition?
We did not.
All right. Did you hire or consult with an expert in armor, like film armoring?
No, we did not.
All right. Did you review any of the fingerprint analysis from the FBI?
No.
Did you review any of the DNA analysis from the FBI?
No.
Did you review any of the ballistic chemistry analysis from the FBI?
No.
Are you aware that Ms. Gutierrez worked in her role as an armorer for 10 of the 12 filming days?
As far as we're aware, it was only permitted 8 days as an armor.
So you would be surprised to hear that she actually was afforded 10 armorer days out of the 12 filming days.
It would be news?
Yes. Okay. Great. Are you aware that Ms. Pickle testified at trial that if Ms. Gutierrez had asked for more than those 10 days, she may have granted them if they were justified?
I'm not aware that she testified that.
All right. Are you aware that on the morning of October 21st, 2021, Ms. Gutierrez had approximately 3 hours of time in which she could have inspected ammunition or done a safety check of the revolver involved in this incident?
No.
But then our prosecutor does the thing that every attorney is told not to do, to ask a question that you do not know the answer to. And that's what he does, and he gets burned. Let's watch.
And do you agree that Ms. Gutierrez, in her role as armorer, contributed to some of the issues that you identified in your report?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Sure. Do you agree that Ms. Gutierrez, in her role as armorer, contributed to some of the findings that you issued in your report?
No, I'm not sure I could necessarily agree.
Okay.
Now watch what happens on redirect with Mr. Montoya.
A little hypothetical that what Mr. Lewis just said. If Ms. Gutierrez had passed off a loaded gun as cold, would that be a workplace hazard? What if Rust had not allowed the armorer sufficient time to inspect that gun and rushed her and instructed her specifically of what they wanted her to do.
She draws an objection to the form of the question, and then she has to rephrase it.
Rephrase my question. So if in what Mr. Lewis had stated, if there was a gun passed off as cold, whose fault would it be, or whose responsibility would it be to ensure that the armor had sufficient time and resources to make that gun safe?
It's always the responsibility of management to supervise effectively and quality control effectively. If an employee is conducting a safety-related task, they pass it off as safe, and supervision does nothing with that, and they allow it to be implemented. Supervision's responsibility to double-check that.
So following him, we had the investigator who did all of the investigation for the defense in this case. And he is a retired police officer who now works as a private investigator, and he conducted interviews and did all kinds of things. Let's listen to a little bit of his qualifications.
Good morning, sir. Can you please state your name again for the jury?
Scott Elliott.
Mr. Elliott, what do you do for a living currently?
I'm currently a private investigator.
And Mr. Elliott, prior to becoming a private investigator, did you have a career in law enforcement?
Yes, I did.
Can you tell the jury what your career was in law enforcement, how many years?
Military and civilian, or just?
Let's start with civilian and we'll work back.
Okay. I was hired by the Albuquerque Police Department, and I attended the academy starting in February of 1993. I retired in 2011. During that time period, I started out field services, normal uniform patrol. I went to the gang unit. Then I became a violent crimes detective in about 1995-96. And in 1998, I became a homicide detective.
Approximately how many investigations do you think you worked on in homicide?
As a case agent, 35 or 40. Assisting on homicides, 150, 200.
Now, after getting his qualifications, he had some criticisms. Let's go through a couple of those.
First of all, at the scene, at the initial scene when law enforcement responds, can you tell the jury, do you have any conclusions about the quality of the investigation by the sheriffs at the scene?
Yeah, some of that was reached by my own observations and some of it through interviews of the deputies on the scene. I felt like their response was probably not what it should be. There were hundreds of people on that ranch, but if you narrow it down to who was in the church at the time of the shooting and who may have had involvement with the case, for example, the people that were just outside, there was really about 20 people. The first responding deputies, their job is first preservation of life, and then it is preservation of evidence and identifying witnesses and possible suspects. In this case, it was known very quickly who the shooter was, but it wasn't known who the witnesses were. And those witnesses, once they were identified, they should have been segregated so they couldn't talk among themselves.
Now let me stop there. When you initially, as a law enforcement homicide detective or somebody going on scene, you identify the shooter, what in your opinion is one of the first things that you should do?
Well, the first thing you do is put someone with that individual, segregate them from everyone else. You also want to, those individuals, since you are preserving evidence, you also want to secure their cell phones.
What is your conclusion about what can happen if people are not segregated and they're allowed to talk to people?
Well, one, you can delete things off your phone. You can delete photos. It wasn't known at the time if somebody was videotaping what was going on inside on their phone. That's possible. Almost every case you work now, someone has videotaped it with their phone.
Did you also?
Now, in this next part, we're going to look at how the prosecutor, in this case, the female prosecutor, goes about cross-examining him. And I want you to watch what he does when he is asked a question that essentially might seem to impeach him. He doesn't fight with the examiner. He gives the answer that is truthful, I'm assuming, and then he waits for the next question because he trusts that his counsel, that the counsel who's representing Hannah, will come back and fill in anything that the prosecutor omitted. In this way, he doesn't come off as cross or combative or as somebody with an agenda. He's just there to state the facts. And I think he does it very well. Let's watch.
You testified on direct examination that there was a person who left the scene that was never identified. Do you recall making that statement?
I did, and that was based on what came out of some of the interviews. I don't quite recall. I think the lieutenant asked if we had everybody. And
What lieutenant are you talking
Lieutenant Benavides.
Okay.
And one of the deputies responded with, one left. And I think he asked who that was, and the deputy didn't know.
But you know, don't you? Because you interviewed him and you asked him. Didn't you interview Reed Russell? And when you interviewed Reed Russell, he told you that he left so that he could go to the hospital to be with his close friends. And before he left, he gave all of his contact information to the police.
Now I have to jump in here. You notice that she didn't let him answer the first question. She moved right into Reed Russell. And I think the reason that she did that is because she feared the answer, because we'll find out here in a moment what he really thinks. But I'm also surprised that the defense counsel is not protecting his witness. He should be up saying, Your Honor, let him answer a question. Let him finish his answer. Quit cutting him off. And that should be done here. But for whatever reason, defense isn't doing that. I guess they trust this witness with numerous years of law enforcement experience to protect himself in that regard. And I think he does a reasonably good job in that regard.
His contact information to the police. You interviewed him. Do you recall that?
I did.
Do you need to see a copy of the interview?
I don't.
And you also understand that Mr. Russell, who left the scene to go to the hospital, was interviewed the very next day by Detective Cano. Aren't you aware of that?
I am, yes.
So what's the mystery? Who's the mystery man that left the set? He was identified, right? Correct?
Mr. Russell was identified, but I was never quite clear if it was the same individual.
Now, things have been going reasonably well, I guess, for the state and for the defense so far. I'd say it's fairly evenly matched, although I think the scales probably tilt a little bit in favor of the state at this point. I have looked at the orders of the court and how she overruled a lot of the legal issues in the case, essentially by overruling motions. And I think a lot of those motions are going to come back to haunt her if it goes up on appeal. And especially if it goes up on a federal habeas, because in most respects, these are some denials of due process. But that will be a separate video later on. Perhaps if there is a conviction, we'll have to see about that. But one of the things that's really important when you hire an expert is that you hire an expert who is actually an expert. Somebody who's done more than simply teach hunter safety courses, and also somebody who's worked with people other than you. Now, this first little part of the cross-examination, I think, is powerful, but only because of this segment. Now, a lot of this doesn't have any audio, but you will watch what happens here with the firearm that's in the hand of this expert.
Do it in public, and I will clarify that it is not loaded. It's a real...
Mr. Kuski, are you able to take the cylinder out so you can show everyone also that it's unloaded?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
And here is an NX revolver.
So, Your Honor, I'm going to object.
All right, first of all, everybody's nervous because you have not demonstrated to us that they're unloaded. So before you start showing us the weapons, make sure they're unloaded, including that one that you just touched.
Now watch what the prosecutor does with that.
Do you agree with me that basic gun safety requires that the handler of the gun not point the gun at anyone?
If it's a real gun, yes.
Do you agree with me that while you were sitting here in the courtroom, you pulled out a gun and you pointed it at the judge?
I do not.
You disagree?
I pointed the gun into this space up here, never directly at the judge.
Do you agree that basic gun safety requires that you keep the muzzle of the gun pointed down for safety?
Not at all. A gun may be pointed, as any hunter education class like I taught, may be pointed up, may be pointed back, may be pointed cross arms, as in the military, may be pointed at the ground, may be put in something like a military stance, such as order arms with the butt on the ground and the piece right under your arm. So, no. And to further, in a cross draw or any of the...
No, I'm not talking about a cross draw, thank you.
Okay, so he cleaned it up a little bit when he talked about where he pointed the weapon and how he pointed the weapon and all of that. But he is coming off as cross and combative. He's also coming off a little bit kooky, frankly. There's no rifle in this, so the whole idea of port arms and order arms and all of that just doesn't fly. I'm not really sure where he was going with that other than justifying the fact that at least from the position of the prosecutor and the people in the gallery, if not from the position of the people in the jury box, it certainly looked like he pointed the firearm at the judge. You want to make sure that you are completely safe when you come into court. And in my opinion, what the person should have done, what the expert should have done, is he should have said, Your Honor, I need to stand up so I can pick up this firearm and point it to the ground when I am checking it out. And, I've already stated that it is empty. I'm happy to demonstrate that it's empty, but in order to do that, I need to stand up so that I can point it down, or I need for everybody here to be okay with me pointing it up. Which will it be? In that regard, he takes care of the problem, but here I think he had a mental lapse. It actually helped the defense in terms of what Alec Baldwin should have done, because now you have the prosecutor saying, well, he should have pointed it, in a safe direction. And that's exactly what Alec Baldwin did wrong. Hannah didn't do that. So we'll have to see how the jury sorts all that out. I'm going to release this over the weekend, I think, or maybe right before the weekend. I know that the jury is probably going to get the case today on what is Wednesday, and we should have a verdict sometime Thursday or Friday. I will try to bring a short to you when we have that information, but at least at this point, I know I'm going to be out of town. I'm going to be away from high-speed internet, so I probably are going to have to wrap this up the first of next week with a video that sort of encapsulates all of that. That's what I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. If you have the opportunity today, do something kind for someone, and then catch me back here at the beach again next time. If you like this video, here are a few others you might try, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a terrific day, guys.